Es el color de tu piel que anda tu policía. Sabes que no te va a ir bien en la cama como perro me vas a ver. No me vas a dejar en paz hasta que haga lo que digas. Pinche puerco de policía, pinche puerco de policía. Pinche puerco de policía.
All right. Welcome to Freethinker Radio, 90.1 KPFT Houston, and on the Conscious Resistance Network. My name is Derrick Burrows, and I'm here with
Micah Jackson.
How's it going?
We're out here tonight in the city of Houston, broadcasting, of course, on 90.1 KPFT every Friday, where we're happy to be here. This is, of course, for those who are new, and August is a fundraising moment, month for KPFT, as we're trying to get more funds into the KPFT community so they can continue to broadcast and continue to be the only station in Houston that is corporate-free, commercial-free, community-funded for 50 years now in the city of Houston. But
so make that pledge.
We're definitely in a difficult time, so if you can help in any way, please do visit kpft.org. It allows us to not only broadcast through the internet, but we get to broadcast on the FM airwaves of the fourth largest city in the United States. So that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. And I love it. Friday afternoon, people heading home. What better time to get the ideas out and share the music? We were just listening to Fusca. That's pretty good. Johnny recommended that. Thanks, Johnny.
Yeah,
we've had them on
punk from Houston.
They've been on the show before.
They've been on the show. They've been on lineups of events we've hosted. They're good, and it's great that so many bands in Houston are working during this time. We've shared Sanitary Lanny from Darwin's Finches and other songs, and that Lanny, you gotta see it.
Sanitary Lanny.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that they are commenting in diverse ways of things that are happening, and they're right here in Houston, like us, like KPFT. And we talk about stuff worldwide, but it's important to have a foothold in Houston doing that. And I feel like our show is unique. I love other shows on here like Afrotronic and goodness, Sweet Nightmares and such. KPFT's been an institution for years and years and decades, and I'm glad Derrick gave it praise. Now is a dire time for many businesses. One of the articles we may get into is millions of small businesses are closing due to politicians. KPFT is always struggling, and it's probably struggling now as much as ever. So we do need your support, and thank you for speaking to that, everybody that does.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to cover a few Houston stories, some Texas news, and it seems like a lot of the theme of probably the second half of the show is going over news happening across the United States. We're going to get as far as Australia, and then even in Germany, different reports of crazy things happening to people because of COVID-19, because of mask mandates, or the push for a vaccine, the talk of fining people for vaccines. And we can mention a Yale study we'll get into about how to convince people to take a vaccine, how to shame them into it. And I've had my share of death threats this week from posting a picture of myself not wearing a mask.
COVID's kind of like glitter. It seems to be getting into every story there is.
It's everywhere. I mean, I feel like at this point, it probably isn't.
It's not as pretty.
Related in every single story we're talking about. But let's go ahead and get into some of that. I know we had...
I had a little local story that I didn't think was that big a deal, but they made sure they mentioned COVID in it.
Yeah, let's get into that.
And in a way, I didn't think the story was a big deal, but I do think it's worth mentioning. And this came out of the Houston Chronicle. And an elderly woman is basically accused of assaulting the police, grabbing their privates and stuff.
His testicles, to be clear.
There you go. An elderly Houston woman was accused this week of tussling with police officers, squeezing one by the testicles and kicking the other in the head. I mean, that's kicking the other in the head. And while she was knowingly infected with COVID-19, the way it sounds, knowingly infected, according to Harris County court records. Nakichi Ogu, hope I didn't mutilate the name, 79 years old, scrapping with the police. So if you're ever on the edge and you don't think you got what it takes, I want you to think about Iko Ogu here. 79 years old. She was charged Tuesday with 1 count of assaulting a police. Wait, just out of the blue, she was, this is what gets me. She gets 1 count of assaulting a police officer, no other charges. She remains in Harris County Jail in lieu of $10,000 bonds. We should have a GoFundMe. The officer, only identified as
Jay Zavala.
Yeah, was attempting to detain Iko Ogu at her home around noon Monday in the 9700 block of Leawood Boulevard. And I think that's a little rough sometimes, right? Because what we talk about with Goins, there were oftentimes he was the only officer there, and maybe Officer Zavala was actually trying to help this person and happened to be there. I don't know. I'm not pretending that I do know, but all of a sudden we just got one officer's word against her, and she was at her home, and she's only charged with this assault on an officer. Well, why were the police at her home?
That's the interesting part, is what is
trying to detain her with no charges except assaulting an officer.
And also, I mean, are we really supposed to just blindly trust?
Some more to the story.
Well, the cop says that he scratched her, right?
I've been
accused of scratching a cop's thumb.
She scratched him on the forearm, and this is what the incident report that was filed by the police says. The report did not specify the agency for which he worked, so we're not sure really what kind of cop he was. The scratch broke the skin and caused him to bleed, police said. She then reached for the officer's testicles, squeezing, quote, real hard and pulling down on them, police said. Okay, Officer Zavala states that he felt pain in that moment and is still feeling pain hours later. Well, I mean, a 79-year-old woman has to fight when it's time to fight, you know. The brawl continued even after a Houston police officer responded. According to the report, Iko Ogu scratched, punched, spit on, and grabbed on both officers. She was a one individual riot squad. She also kicked the responding Houston police officers in the face. I mean, this is a lot for
this is too much.
One individual.
To know what the original.
She did this while infected with COVID-19. Second time in the story. I'm not saying it twice. This is the second time the media is saying it in the same story.
So, I mean, you have to wonder then, did it have something to do with that?
And the reason I'm bringing it to the table is the fact that she's only charged with that one crime. Officer Zavala initially tried to take her into custody with an emergency detention order.
Sounds like a red flag law type of deal.
An emergency detention.
You're like a danger to yourself or others type of thing. Mental health checks.
The report indicates police plan to take her, and 2 people can basically complain about you, and I think can cause that to happen, to take her to the neuropsychiatric center at Bentab Hospital. They instead filed charges because police took her to the same hospital last week, the report said. She had been admitted under emergency detention order, but later released. So that's what the hospital has to say.
So there's clearly more to this story. Like, this lady got sometime last week, got an emergency detention order. They put her in a mental hospital. Then she gets out and goes home. They show up at her house.
Well, they let her out. Let's give it to it's like she didn't just get out. Like, you know what I mean? I mean, I hear what you're saying. She did get out, but let's make it clear that the hospital released her. So the hospital thought this was fine individual to let go, let home, live her own life. I think this is very important because I think things like this happen to all kinds of people. Maybe this is a situation where the woman's evil. Let's just assume worst, okay? But all the time people complain about people. Here, the first time, people are probably complaining, this elderly lady, she gets loud, she lives by herself, whatever they complain about. The people go check her out. They detain her for a few hours, 72 hours under observation. They let her out. She seems to know who the president is.
I mean, there's a lot of people who don't do well under those circumstances.
Yeah, and then repeat the situation again until she can't take it anymore. I think the older they are, the less likely they are to put up with police coming to detain them for 72 hours.
Yeah. Old people don't want to put up with
She scratched it the second time. She wasn't going back. I mean, if she already went and got put away once without being charged with a crime, what she'd been taught, even if she never was before in her life, never to mention that she obviously, I don't know what race white is, but when I look at this picture, she doesn't pass with what everyone else tells me is white.
I mean, is she a danger to society?
I think that she's probably been through a rough life, and I'm sorry that she had to suffer through that.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry the officer got scratched and got thrown into.
She would be going to.
I'm really sorry the officer got scratched and even found himself having to be in this situation. You know, maybe this is like the soft border of dealing with mental illness or whatever you want to say, and having police in these roles. See,
Yeah.
so they would have just taken her to the hospital, but he got scratched. Instead, she ends up in
You're
Harris
not allowed
County
to hurt the gang.
with a $10,000 bond, and now she's going to have to date the system for a year or two at 79 years old, make her way to probation or whatever they give her.
I'm trying to be less crazy after the whole.
Yeah.
Well, you're listening to Freethinker Radio right now on 90.1 KPFT Houston on the Conscious Resistance. Let's switch gears. Mike, I got this story pulled up. I think you said it to me. 2 Fort Hood soldiers among 9 arrested. More things coming out of Fort Hood.
We just
now.
got to rapping about Fort Hood a little bit, and it's been in the news for a long time. I mean, you've got more of a history just ready to spit it out, Derek, than I do, but I'll get into the story, and then let's wax a little bit about Fort Hood. Killeen Police Department Special Victims Unit, along with the Texas Department of Public Safety Human Trafficking Program, concluded a 2-day prostitution sting on Saturday, during which they arrested 9 suspects, 2 of whom are Fort Hood soldiers. Just, not soldiers are like other people, they make mistakes, and we've talked about this, but school's out of session and such, right? So the goal of this effort was to find and arrest those who are willing to make overt efforts to pay minors to engage in sexual acts. So it was targeting that. During this operation, suspects contacted officers through various social media platforms and made agreements for sexual acts with girls they believed were 15 or 16 years old. These agreements were for fees that included money, drugs, and or alcohol. The suspects were arrested without incident, and operation concluded with 7 felony charges for second-degree prostitution of a minor, 2 misdemeanor prostitution charges, and 2 guns were confiscated. Although no children were involved in this operation, there are resources for victims, etc. So 6 Fort Hood soldiers were arrested, 14 total arrested in the prostitution sting.
15 and 16-year-old girls. Is that what?
Yeah, they knowingly were trying to get with and pay money for 15 and 16-year-old girls. One was a 25-year-old soldier, and I don't see what age the other soldier was. Maybe they are not making the information public. Maybe it was an officer or something.
Well, the whole thing about Fort Hood, what I was
here we go, a
talking
30-year-old, and both of them were felony prostitution under 18 soldiers.
And how many soldiers you said? 15?
They said 6 Fort Hood soldiers were rounded up, but 2 of them for underage attempts.
So that's just the latest in a string of things. I mean, folks who've been listening for a while will be
There's
familiar.
no point in saying their names.
Well, you'll be familiar with Vanessa Guillen, the soldier from Fort Hood, who was recently found dead after she had come forward, saying that she had been sexually assaulted by, still not certain who. And then, she's been accused of being murdered by another soldier and maybe his wife. I mean, it's a very fishy story that even the family has stated they're not sure they totally buy into. I'm showing on screen right now, just for those who are interested in relation to her story, there's going to be a public memorial scheduled this Friday in Houston. According to the family attorney, it's going to be taking place at Chavez High School Friday, August 14th from noon to 8 p.m. with a private funeral for her on Saturday. So, her young life, like she just graduated from Houston High School, I think a year or 2 ago, and went into the Army. Then we have another story. Army promises changes at Fort Hood following, her murder, and that they're going to try to fix the, quote, root causes of a number of violent acts that have happened there. We can go to the 2009 Fort Hood shooting where an alleged terrorist, Nidal Hassan, who was a U.S. Army major and psychiatrist, fatally shot 13 people. And there are definitely, for those who go down those rabbit holes, conspiracies about each of these and why there might be, what might be going on at Fort Hood, where there's prostitution rings, there's soldiers talking about being sexually assaulted. There's the 2009-2014 shooting spree in Fort Hood military base. So there's a number of these kinds of incidents. Maybe they're not related at all. I'll let you decide. But that there are those rabbit holes out there if you want to tumble down there. But definitely just not good things coming out of Fort Hood, it seems.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a great place to buy some real estate.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
But I mean, it's not. I know that when I bring those topics up, some people kind of shy away from that because I'm not saying we have the hard evidence just yet. I mean, I haven't gone down that rabbit hole. Maybe other people have, and they have more to say on that. Maybe you guys should comment, and we'll go ahead and talk about that.
Outlandish number of headlines, though, just for one small Killeen town. When you take that in and of itself. So.
I do know that there's definitely it's not unheard of. We know for a fact things like on the surface level, MK Ultra. There's also, MK Delta. There was Project Artichoke. There was all these number of different army and military experience that specifically dealt with what people would term mind control, attempting to influence the mind, shape the mind. Exactly. Should we really believe? There's a really amazing 4-hour documentary by the channel Truth Stream Media that talks about that. If anybody's interested in that. But I mean, the things that we hear about MK Ultra, that, they dosed some people with acid. Yeah, that's true. But that's just the very surface level of the amount of experimentation that was going on back in the 40s and 50s. And yeah, according to the church hearings in the 60s, the 70s, they claim they stopped all that, no longer do human experiments. But I think we could safely say that's probably not accurate, to say the least. And I don't know.
That's probably the biggest
crazy
one.
World.
That's the biggest human experiment. Let's see if they'll believe this. I remember a while back when we were talking about those some nations that had bought technology from the CIA that would stop people from spying on them, and then they found out they were being spied on by the CIA. What the heck, I mean, come on.
Micah, let's move forward. What do you got? This suing the police? You sent me a lot of these stories.
Yeah, I sent you stuff. That's right. I thought this one was interesting, and I got it out of the Houston Chronicle, even though the story's up in Maryland, and I think it's relevant to Houston. We spent a long time talking about no-knock raids here in Houston, and the fatalities and just the sheer danger of them for both police and, I guess, people in the community. It turns out that there's a legal group that sued a Maryland police department for copies of any body camera videos of a fatal shooting of a man. And we brought this up on the show that these no-knock raids are the most dangerous raids police go on. And most police departments have body cams. I cannot imagine going on a no-knock raid without them having body cams. Wyatt, in this day and age, are you serious? Are you just
accountability?
Backwards? Yeah. Do you not care about the law? Is that why there's no body cams on the no-knock raids? I don't know. A fatal shooting of a man whose family says he was asleep in his bedroom when police opened fire.
Duncan Lamp, I remember this one.
Judicial Watch Inc. has filed its lawsuit against the Montgomery County Police Department, which has not publicly acknowledged whether it captured any video of this March 12th shooting, as Derrick referenced, Duncan Lamp. The 21-year-old man's death has galvanized a movement that hails Lamp as a martyr. Prosecutors in neighboring Howard County are reviewing the shooting. Members of a tactical unit were serving a no-knock search warrant at Lamp's home around 4:30 a.m. on March 12th when an officer fatally shot him. Lamp's girlfriend and parents say he was asleep in his bed beside his girlfriend when police fired at him from outside the house in Potomac, Maryland. In Texas, when they did this, the no-knock raid, people shot them. Anyway, let's see what else is going on. The family's account contradicts a statement issued by the police department, which said Lamp was armed with a rifle and ignored commands to show his hands and get on the ground when officers entered the family's home. The department also said police found a booby trap affixed to the frame of his bedroom door. Judicial Watch sued the police department on July 28th in the Montgomery Circuit Court. It accuses the department of violating the Maryland Public Information Act. Group said that the department failed to respond to its June 18th records request for videos of the shooting. Quote, given the vastly differing accounts of what happened, the Montgomery County Police Department needs to release all body cam footage from the SWAT team raid on and shooting of Duncan Lamp. Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton said in a statement Tuesday, quote, without withholding basic public information about a police shooting undermines public confidence in law enforcement. I think that's true, no matter how you feel about it. The Associated Press filed a public records request for such video only days after the shooting. The department's records custodian denied the request on April 3rd, saying it was an open case and that, quote, and we've seen this before, disclosure at this time would interfere with a valid and proper law enforcement proceeding. A police department spokesperson didn't immediately respond Tuesday to an email and text message seeking comment on the lawsuit. A spokesperson for Howard County State's attorney said the office will not release any details of the case until it is concluded. Sandler said Lamp's family appreciates Judicial Watch for pursuing accountability and transparency of police conduct during officers' entry of their home. Sadler has criticized the police department for refusing to release any videos of the shooting or even confirm whether such evidence exists. For 5 months after police killed Duncan Lamp in his own home, in his bedroom, Police have said nothing, revealed nothing, and have refused the grieving Lemp family any information about his death, she wrote in an email Tuesday. Calls to release any video of Lemp's shooting have become a rallying cry for
Here we go with the propaganda.
A group of individuals, who don't want to be shot in their bedroom, I guess. A post on Lemp's Instagram account shortly before his death.
No, but look what they said. A loose network of gun-toting anti-government extremists.
I'm already been skipping the propaganda throughout the...
This is what they're calling the Boogaloo movement, which literally came from a meme, about like it's time to Boogaloo, and now that's like the new name for the right-wing, gun crowd.
Detectives obtained the warrant to search the home. Lemp shared with his parents and younger brother after receiving an anonymous tip that Lemp was illegally possessing firearms. I wonder if he got any illegal firearms, you know what I'm saying? Because we saw that in 100% of his raids here in Houston. Goins said there were illegal firearms, but never recovered a single one. The officers who shot Lemp was placed on administrative leave.
We need to reform the amount of weight that anonymous tips carry. Actions cause, like anonymous tip, you get a little door knock, maybe not no knock raid.
I think in the case of Duncan Lemp, the reason they probably did a no knock raid is probably because of whatever they want to associate him with.
Illegal firearms.
But also this because that's the new.
All they got
push for that term to become like the new domestic extremist.
But all they got to do is put illegal firearms, and they get the
but as far as them getting justification, definitely if they say firearms, but also if they say this guy's always part of the Boogaloo anti-government movement, he's posting online with guns. I mean, right away they're just going to assume the worst, and that's the propaganda they keep pushing. I saw an article from Dallas County News, and it was Antifa or Boogaloo, who's more extreme, and it's like these are the kinds of extremes that the groups that they're creating, right? The sub kind of cultures that are created. I have friends who, call themselves Boogaloo online sort of jokingly, but also they are armed to the teeth and they are prepared to protect themselves in the event of some civil war or government, whatever, and they see this kind of stuff as a joke. But now, obviously, people like Duncan Lemp, who has some guns and is posting pictures saying Boogaloo, is going to get labeled an anti-government domestic extremist. And I did a video earlier today. I just think that, Micah, you remember that during the Bush administration, it was a serious thing for Bush to talk about domestic terrorists and domestic extremists and
really more like Clinton, but yeah.
Well, but after 9/11, they started saying, and during the Obama administration, they started saying now the threat is not going to be ISIS or not going to be Al Qaeda. Now it's like the rise of domestic extremism. And they're putting out those Patriot hit lists and all that kind of stuff, saying people who believe Ron Paul and people who believe in gold and question the Federal Reserve could potentially be domestic extremists.
Hey, right now in China, if you say there's going to be a bank run, you'll be arrested, even though there are bank runs. Well, you will be arrested in China for saying there's going to be a bank run.
That term, though, is getting used now as a way where people are just calling their political enemy, like Antifa. I see a lot of people on the right saying, well, they're domestic extremists, so whatever, let the government go in there with armed to the teeth and federal agents and take them off the streets. And the other side is like, you don't want to take a vaccine? You're a domestic extremist, for not wanting to submit to that. And it's just this, I think that's just a dangerous way to start labeling, because that's the government's language, the language they have used to demonize and attack people for,
Yeah, that's kind of why I skipped it in the propaganda part, because, these toilet papers of record, whatever you want to call these mainstream media that are getting what little information we can glean out of them out. Most of them are just laden. And as you pointed out, right and left, they try to divide us all into two camps. And each one of us, if we go anywhere near either one of these camps, has heard the other camp's arguments 20,000 fold. And if you're like, don't fall for either, you've heard the arguments 40,000 fold, and then some validity here and some validity there. But then you start realizing, I think, that, oh my God, what one party system? This is more than just one party system. This is like, I can't even go down that rabbit hole, because the point of the matter is they're in so much agreement on the things that you're talking about. There's so much agreement on the things that are unclear in the news. They're in so much agreement on supporting the people who have organizations that have donated to both parties. Those are the things that people need to really see. And those things are what they call home when it's time for legislation. So I'm sorry for going off on a little tangent there, but I think it's important for people to see the bigger picture. I'm just going to play a short clip, if you guys don't mind, from this interview I did earlier today. I was telling you guys it was supposed to be a 30-minute interview. It actually was a 25-minute interview, but of that, only about 6 minutes really came out. And so I'm just going to play the bit. For those who are watching on screen, you're looking at John
Whitehead. He's the head of the Rutherford Institute, rutherford.org. And you've probably seen his writing on Ron Paul's website, Mint Press News, Activist Post, a bunch of independent media websites. And he's a constitutional attorney who has fought cases up in the Supreme Court and very much aware of the dire situation we're dealing with prior to COVID, even before this, talking about things like stingrays, drones, the NDA, national security letters.
Comments before we go real
quick?
Sure. I was just kind of noticing them because, I think it's a very important part of the show, and I'm really glad. Some of them that stick out are Christians and veterans are on the top. Things that people think are on their list, their list. Soon the term patriot will be a dirty word, if not already. I don't know. That's difficult because they want you to feel like you're a patriot if you take the vaccine, right? But
exactly. That word's already, I think, been just
retaken.
Yeah, just taken over and not really.
Every ex-military member is on the list, a list.
Well, and this is the kind of things I was talking with John Whitehead about, because he reminded me of some things that I'd forgotten, Micah, that the Homeland Security Act after 9/11, along with the Patriot Act. He also talked about how he's seen in court that different federal agencies do have, the threat whatever thing. So that's why when they show up at a Duncan Lim's house or whatever, they've already looked and the threats assessment says this person is potentially dangerous. So they're already using that on all of us. I've talked about in past episodes how people are being denied loans and jobs based on things they posted on social media without ever being told that's why they were denied. And so this interconnected world that is increasingly militarized, increasingly surveyed, he's been one person who's been fighting it for a long time. And what the interview was focused on is how he sees people who were formerly about the Constitution now falling for supporting Trump's effort to send federal agents into different cities. People who are on the left who might be consider themselves liberal or kind of fighting police brutality, cheering on the police to come force a vaccine on you, and how both parties are just losing the Constitution for whatever it's worth. So I'm just going to play this little 5-minute clip here, guys, and then we're going to go to a song. We'll be back here on Freethinker Radio. We got lots more to cover, so thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be right back. Any other websites that carry his work. So today we're talking with Mr. John Whitehead. How are you doing, sir?
Busy as ever with the crazy way the country's operating at this point in time, and very concerned about the future. The word's not concerned. I would use the word freaked a little bit, but the country's being reconstructed, by the way, and very, very carefully and well done, in my opinion. So, and people are changing, by the way, psychologically. I can see that across the country, how they view the Constitution, how they view rights, and especially how they view other people.
Absolutely. I mean, we're just witnessing such a monumental shift. One that myself, I'm 35 years old. I was in high school, the end of high school when 9/11 happened. I think this is the only kind of comparable model as to how quickly and rapidly the world is shifting is what happened in the days after 9/11. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it. One of the reasons I reached out to you was this article that you published on the Rutherford Institute, "The Federal Coup to Overthrow the States and Nix the 10th Amendment is Underway." And of course, talking about what was going on in Portland and what continues to go on in Portland. And now Trump talking about sending federal agents into Chicago and other cities. I live in a major city in Houston. One day they could decide they want to do the same thing here because our crime rate's too high or something. Let's talk about that and some of the points you made in there, which two things I want to focus on is particularly the lapses in judgment coming from the left and the right. How you pointed out that in many cases, the left-wing sort of social justice activists are playing right into the police state's hands. But then at the same time, we also have kind of right-wing conservatives making excuses for the use of federal agents. And so let's kind of talk about that and what you were pointing out in that article.
Well, what I'm pointing out, but again, you talk about 9/11. The country made a dramatic shift after 9/11 with the U.S. Patriot Act, which allowed basically the 342-page act that was passed, believe it or not, 342 pages, a little over a month after 9/11, I think one day after, a month and a day. And obviously it was written before, but it gave the federal government amazing powers to go into cities and to everybody's homes. The FBI could go into your home and download all the information off of your computer, leave and not tell you were there. And then there was the creation of the national security letters, if you've ever heard of those. The FBI can go into libraries, banks, get all your information, and they just carry this letter. It's not approved by a judge, no way. And they can go into and get all your information from a bank or whatever, and the bankers can't even tell you that they've been there. So this idea of the federal government shifting has been going on for a long time, and all you have to do is open your eyes and look and study a little bit, and you'll see some of the things that have been happening. For example, 6 or 7 years ago, the Department of Homeland Security, which basically now runs the country, it's a secret group. I call it a secret service group, purchased 1.6 million hollow point bullets and handed them out to all the federal agents across the country. The Smithsonian Institution, the IRS, all have SWAT teams now, and they can raid your home, and they have been raiding people's homes. So we talk about the dissipation of the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment's been flushed down the toilet a long time ago, folks. If you see how things are operating. When you have the Department of Homeland Security doing threat assessments on all homes in America that go from green to red, depending on whether you've committed a crime. And people wonder why sometimes cops show up at doors now all agitated and are pushing people aside and throwing them down on a porch. They have those threat assessments on their phones and their other screen devices, their Stingray devices, by the way, given to them by the Department of Homeland Security, which they can pull in front of your home or wherever you're at and download all the information off your laptop, your cell phone, even your phone calls. So, and the NSA admits they're recording and downloading all our phone calls now anyway. So, are we really in the country that the so-called founding fathers put together? No.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second, John.
Constitution be damned is the word.
I want to just pause here for a moment because I'm gonna make the sad assumption that there's going to be some people who come across this interview who don't even know what the 10th Amendment is. So would you mind breaking that down for folks?
Yeah, let me grab our little pamphlet we give out free to people. The 10th Amendment, folks. Again, it's not taught in the schools. I run the lawyers that can't tell me what's in the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the 10th Amendment anymore. But the 10th Amendment says the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. In other words, it proposes the doctrine of nullification. In other words, if the federal government's overstepping its bounds, state governments and local governments have the right to nullify acts. But nobody does that, Harley. I mean, no one knows they can do that. I mean, I talk to people in city councils, state boards, and they go, the 10th Amendment, and they rub their chins. I say, you have the power to back these people off. Do you really want the FBI raiding people's homes? Do you want the 80,000 SWAT team raids that happen every year across this country where kids are getting shot, all basically trained again militarily by the FBI? So the 10th Amendment does give the states the power to do certain things and back off troops. But as what I've seen, again, I've talked to police departments across the country. If you remember 3 years ago, was it 3 years ago? Yes, Charlottesville debacle happened. The actual police met with me and they said, we'd like to have a meeting with John White on the Constitution. I went through it with them and they put their heads down. I said, what's wrong? They said, we're afraid of Antifa. And I said, what? They were afraid of Antifa. I said, what about the right-wing people who want to keep the Confederate statues? They went, oh, well, they're not, I don't think they're violent, but we're really afraid of Antifa. And
All right. Welcome back to Free Thinker Radio, 90.1 KPFC Houston. You guys are just listening to a short interview. I know it was really short. I apologize about that. Interview with John Whitehead of the Rutherford Institute. And he was talking about the 10th Amendment. He's talking about the Constitution. As I mentioned earlier, he is an attorney who has basically argued cases in the Supreme Court. He's kind of an old school guy because most of us, I think, don't really pay attention to the Constitution. And even the people who do pay attention to the Constitution are kind of seemingly fighting a losing battle. And as you were talking about, Micah, like, it's not like this is recent. You know, people before 9/11 were talking about constitutional violations, right?
I feel like 9/11 really drove the nail in a lot of ways. I mean, the Constitution had been bleeding as far as people still gave lip service to it. But 9/11, they just did so many crazy things afterwards that the effective power of people being free, like having safeguards and limited government, it's just pretty much like, I don't know, as far as the masses go, the social cohesion behind that thought was lost.
Well, and now here we are, 20 years later, deal with another world-shifting situation that is allowing for unprecedented things to happen. We're going to get into some of those unprecedented things that are coming as a result of COVID-19, of course. we covered this last week, but I think this one is one that really stuck out in my head. It's worth going back over again just briefly. Kentucky couple gets ankle monitors after COVID-19 quarrel with health department. This couple got ankle monitors because they said they wanted to travel and they had to go get a test before they go travel. So then they test positive. They end up being told by the Hardin County Health Department that they have to quarantine and sign some papers promising they were going to quarantine, stay home for 2 weeks, give all their information. They said they didn't agree with some of the language in the papers, so they refused to sign. Then a couple of days later, after denying signing the, quote, self-isolation and controlled movement agreed order, that's the name of this thing, the Hardin County Sheriff's Department arrived at her home without warning. She also described 8 people, 5 different cars, guys in suits with masks, the health department guy, 3 different papers for me and my daughter.
It's big money.
And so if this woman and her husband travel more than 200 feet outside of their home, their ankle monitors will alert law enforcement. Like, did you ever imagine that? I mean, that would be a kind of thing.
Well, I'll be on house arrest in no time.
Like, that is just, so that's a thing. You know, I've been having a lot of,
First they came for the COVID.
I wonder how that would go over in the courtroom. I mean, what is like the legal standing to give me an ankle monitor? I thought you could refuse to sign anything.
You're a threat to the public health, the collective health. You know,
I know, but
that's what they're going to say.
The couple,
was this?
The couple said they were still going to quarantine.
Yeah, all they said was they didn't agree with the language.
So you should be able to refuse to sign any piece of paper.
That's
even if you don't agree with the cop's ticket, you're supposed to be allowed to.
Like, I don't agree with what you're saying there. I'll show up in court, but you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and apparently them not signing it, though, warranted a showing up of this whole group of people at the front door with masks and all kind of in the gear and ready to quarantine them. You know, so that's something that's going on.
Well, I mean, you're basically being tagged and tracked as a non-compliant.
And then after
it's all about compliance, right? I mean, here you got examples of non-compliance.
If you were to refuse that, they'd throw you in jail where they were just letting people out of jail for the disease that you're trying to prevent.
I saw where they were mad because people who had been in jail for serious, like where you have a victim, even murder crimes have been let out early. I'd seen numerous complaints.
There's all kinds.
I saw one that was fairly legitimate, like the sources weren't okay. Then you've got this on the flip side.
So if she refused, she'd go to jail while we're letting people out of jail that are. Yeah, it's kind of ironic.
I think
it's hypocritical. I'm not arguing that people should be let out of jail or whatever, but
they're fining people $250 in Houston, but in some places it's $5,000. You know, it's between that range. That's the range I've seen.
We need to find out who's been fined and how.
Well, I mean, I think that like we saw it was in Jersey or New York or something like. I think it was that New York community where they often are like avoiding vaccines, and they got people to comply. I remember they said like either you're going to get this, you're going to quarantine, or you're going to face, you know, fines $1,500 a day or something like that. But nobody resisted. Everybody complied.
Yeah, they went and found the people from the party.
Yeah, exactly. And they all decided, okay, fine, we'll comply. I got this other one I think you sent, Johnny. States have authority to fine or jail people who refuse coronavirus vaccine, according to an attorney. This has been a very heated argument.
Of course, there's going to be an attorney willing to argue anything. So let's not be too.
Well, this particular case has been coming up.
But let's see how strong
it's being presented pretty strongly. But according to ABC 15, it says, as drug makers race to develop a vaccine against the coronavirus, several legal questions are emerging. Could the government require people to get it? Could people who refuse to roll up their sleeves get banned from the stores or lose their jobs? And then they say the short answer is yes, according to Dave Fox, a law professor and director of Center for Health Law Policy and Bioethics at the University of San Diego. So this guy's basically saying that states can compel vaccinations in more or less intrusive ways. Doesn't that sound nice? He said in an interview, they can limit access to schools or services or jobs. And if people don't get vaccinated, they could force them to pay a fine or even lock them up in jail. So, I mean, basically, it's just going on.
Probably have to be in solitary in jail because, after all, the other prisoners wouldn't want to be with some dirty, unvaccinated prisoner.
Well, what this attorney is arguing, man, is the same thing we just saw in the USA Today piece, where they say that people should be fined, their insurance premiums should go up if they refuse to get a vaccine.
I mean, it's kind of scary.
The title is "It's not un-American, it's patriotic to force vaccines." Like,
and I got in this argument when we were just talking about Bill Gates. Online, somebody was saying this, and I was like, well, at the bottom line, like, I just don't really trust the people making that specific vaccine. So if there's only one person making a COVID vaccine and you don't trust that one company,
what happened to be concerned about?
How are you going to force what? Yeah. So how are you going to force me to not choose my own type of Maybe I have my own vaccine that I injected myself.
Yeah.
And
maybe you can make your own health choices.
And that's what I'm trying to say. Like, it just seems it's just a monopoly. I don't know. And it's gonna get weird if people start having this conversation, as far as like really getting ready to enforce it. It says other countries like France have adopted this aggressive task.
You remember that when this first started, Denmark immediately passed a law saying that they could mandate vaccines. And you also remember here in Houston, back when this thing first started, there was only 2 city council members that tried to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't give the mayor an indefinite emergency order into whenever. That in there clearly says they can do what is necessary. They think to protect public health, and
like, no time limit.
So, but that's happened all around the country with mayors and local bodies being given, indefinite.
I think there ought to be a database of all the people that have taken extreme executive actions that aren't legislative and kind of beyond the pale, because maybe things could return to normal, or within the new, these people will continue to try to get votes. They'll continue to try to sell bonds. They'll continue to try to sell bonds. They'll continue to try to grow in megalomaniac power. And if we've already can reveal them as the tyrants they are,
for sure,
then that might go somewhere. I don't want to forget about them the way so many of the last perpetrators of 08 and even 9/11, the people who passed some of that legislation, like Schumer and others, have stayed in Congress this whole time.
Yeah, they're not held accountable for anything they've done over however long they've been there. They keep doing, so Johnny's talking about this.
I didn't read that bill.
Johnny's talking about this attorney. There's also been Alan Dershowitz, that well-known attorney who is, friends with Epstein, who's very controversial. He's been another person arguing that the state allegedly has the right to compel you to take vaccines. So just to recap, like
I
Kentucky,
argue the state has the power.
Well, they believe they have the legal authority, though, right? And I talked to somebody today on Facebook. I told you I've been getting trolled, and I told them, look, when the law is immoral, or there's no victim to these crimes, then there's no reason to really even bother following it. And they try to tell me there's no logic. That's insane. That's insane to think that, there's a reason you have to get a permit. There's a reason you have to get a driver's registration. There's a reason you have to do all these things. And to run a stop sign when nobody's around, that's still, violating the law, and it's egregious and all these sort of things. And I just think that we're dealing with 2 very different ways of viewing the world, and that those lines are becoming more and more clear now. We're between people who believe in force and those who maybe don't.
It's just,
and there's a spectrum, of course. Like,
it's crazy when
somebody said mandate a vax, I'll mandate bullets to your skull.
Yeah, it's crazy because okay, the president found his executive orders, but now we have local powers with mandates, and it's weird because
everybody's just doing whatever they want.
So people are just popping in laws. Okay, so we're already not being represented no one's voting for these, and then maybe if someone is voting for it, it's from another degree of separation. So it's someone you voted for a while ago voting for something that's going to affect this. And so how many degrees of separation is it going to be eventually? And we're just making up laws. Everywhere's got
Well, and this is what John Whitehead was talking about, how far away we've gotten from the Constitution. I want to briefly recap that. Kentucky ankle monitor, lawyers calling for they have a legal right to force you or at least fine you. USA Today, doctors publishing opinion pieces saying it's patriotic to force vaccinate people. LA mayor saying they're going to cut utilities to homes, businesses. If you're posting parties or large gatherings, they're going to cut off your power, cut off your electricity, cut off your gas. Think about that. They're severing people from the grid. I'm sure they'll go for water eventually soon too. And that's all in the U.S. That's just the U.S.
It'll be everything, right?
That's just the U.S. That's not all the crazy stuff that we've been seeing going on in India, other places.
Throwing parties.
Save money, all kinds of craziness are going on. I saw one of the comments that flew by said that local municipalities haven't been able to write as many tickets because traffic hasn't been insane and stuff. So maybe keep driving well, y'all. Keep driving well. Defund the beast. Plant some plants. We got to do something, because isn't everybody going to be able to transfer over to whatever's coming? I mean, we've seen numerous ways where we're talking about something that's going to be here for years in different ways. And so that means it's a long, protracted battle and a long, protracted need for various things. And so they're saying some things won't be the same. Maybe what we need to think is, what's always the same? What have we always needed? Food and water, maybe a little bit of security, blankets, clothes. I don't know. I hate to go too survivalist, but at the same time, the economy, when you couple it with all this craziness, individuals are left with what? We're going to be stuck in an authoritarian regime with job training for government jobs and very little else.
Contact tracers and compliance monitors and all that kind of stuff.
So you can be paid to be a snitch or something. I mean, come on.
Well, so I want to just show one more kind of COVID related. Then we got a few others I know we want to talk about that aren't specifically COVID related, or at least maybe just sort of related.
Riot.
But this one is about, you guys have to hear this insanity from Victoria Police in Melbourne, Australia, which I think has probably gone the most full-on police state that we've seen in recent memory. So we're going to play this just from the chief of police. So there, you're listening to Freethinker Radio, 90.1 KPFT Houston. We'll be back in just a few moments.
This is clearly the biggest job, the biggest commitment that we have at the moment. It's the most important commitment for Victoria Police, and that is enforcing the Chief Health Officer guidelines. I just want to recap really briefly on what we're already doing, because we have a significant commitment. We have Operation Sentinel, which is every day 500 police officers out and about, tasking, checking populous places, knocking on doors, a whole range of things. We have Operation Sentinel 2, which is the vehicle checkpoints, 8 vehicle checkpoints right around the restricted area, those permanent ones where we're checking the access and egress right throughout the state. We have Operation Shielding, 160 transit police officers, transit protective services officers, I should say, and 80 police officers from transit who are out there every day, and they're making sure that there's public assurance. They're checking who should be in proper areas, and they're enforcing as you would expect them to be doing so. In addition to that, we have Operation Ribbon as well, which is our family violence operation. So there's a whole range of different areas, including Operation Soteria, where we're helping enforcement at quarantine hotels. All up, we're seeing every day upwards of around 1,500 police and PSOs out there enforcing as they should be. I've committed an extra 250 police and PSOs now to that already significant number. And on a daily basis, they will be enforcing throughout the day, but importantly of a night time as well. We will have now, because of the curfew, we'll have significant police and PSOs out there, not just in vehicles and doing if you like, static checks, but we'll have vehicle checkpoints where we'll set them up at random places and keep rolling them around Melbourne. So the potential, the opportunity for someone to be detected who isn't supposed to be out and about is significant. Every police officer right throughout our organisation in any patrol car has a responsibility for COVID-19 enforcement, and that's what they'll be doing. Every one of them will be making sure that we're enforcing these new guidelines, these restricted guidelines. The curfew is obviously significant because we expect to see much reduced movement right around the state. In terms of discretion, which is a word we've heard a lot, we did give a period of discretion there when we moved to masks and other restrictions. That period of discretion is, I've said it before, it's virtually closed. Of course, we can't be prescriptive for every circumstance, but it will only be in an exceptional circumstance. In an exceptional circumstance that Victoria Police will be using discretion, because we just have to stop this movement. We have to enforce the CHO guidelines. The vast majority of people are doing the right thing, and for those who are, I thank you, but there is still a minority who aren't. We've given out a significant range of infringements, as the Minister has outlined, 161 last night. 60 of those were for for not wearing masks. And from our perspective, though, the people, the vast majority who are doing the right thing, need to understand for those who aren't, there is a consequence. And there are consequences, and I want to be really clear on that. In the last week, we've seen a trend, an emergence, if you like, of groups of people, small groups, but nonetheless concerning groups who classify themselves as sovereign citizens, whatever that might mean, people who don't think the law applies to them. We've seen them at checkpoints, baiting police, not providing their name and address. On at least 3 or 4 occasions in the past week, we've had to smash the windows of people in cars and pull them out of there so they could provide their details because they weren't telling us where they were going. They weren't adhering to the Chief Health Officer guidelines. They weren't providing their name and their address. We don't want to be doing that, but people have to absolutely understand there are consequences for your actions, and if you're not doing the right thing, we will not hesitate to issue infringements, to arrest you, to detain you where it's appropriate. As I say, it's not something we want to be doing, but it is what we will do, and it has been occurring in the last week. And particularly one incident, if I like to highlight the type of challenges that we're experiencing. Last night, a 26-year-old policewoman was on patrol with another partner down in the Frankston area near the Bayside.
Sorry about that, guys.
Wow.
A little echo there, but yeah, doesn't that sound crazy to you guys? What we just heard? That
Let's
was
hope
coming
it sounds
from
crazy to you guys.
Victoria. Hopefully it does. Hopefully you're still, aware of freedom and liberty, and it's just insane that this is going on. If you heard that Victoria Police in Melbourne,
Name and
Australia,
address, please.
saying that
They
they
said
had
to
to
break out windows because they wouldn't say where they were
smash
going.
people's car windows and drag them out of their cars for not telling them their addresses. I mean, that is happening right now. And
Not because the
world.
puppy was locked up or the
You're
roof.
visiting your grandma. What's your grandma's name?
Yeah.
I mean,
Or
it's
the
just,
poor wicked wolf. I mean, come on. This is pretty bad.
it's insane to me.
And we saw an article already in Houston that they were going to be able to start tracking the metrics to let you know how many mask violators
Houston
there were.
HPD did
I
say they're
imagine
going
that's
to
going
do
to be a whole new metric out there showing up in the news throughout the way.
How are they going to track that?
Well, that guy said 169, right?
They were clearly keeping
Oh,
track of something.
violations. Okay.
Oh yeah, his infringements, but
I
also
They're
forgot
not going to know how many.
I
really
forgot it's
happened,
illegal.
but
I think the cop. I'm hoping that the HPD isn't going to be very fond of enforcing
is-
that.
well, we also have to remember that they're starting to roll
This
the
is
contact
Texas,
tracing
after
apps
all.
on people's
What
phones
kind
now.
of-
And so if people are carrying around their phones
I've been leaving my phone at home.
and they're
Ugh.
running contact tracing apps, whether you know it or not, your friends could be snitching on you and where they're going and what, this person is
If your
there.
friend snitches and they don't know, should you pop a cap in them anyway?
I got one more coronavirus
How many
story.
stitches for?
I know we
for
promised no
snitch?
more coronavirus stories, but I have one more just to throw in that relates to this contact tracing thing and sort of the surveillance grid and how they could find you. I found this randomly. Newly released White House documents show that they are in fact trying to use contact tracing apps to survey Americans using an
Imagine
old
that.
tool, fusion centers. They said that
They're already there, man.
they want to see if the fusion centers can help them. And this came from
now we need to
the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. It's some weird thing.
drain in that swamp.
There's what they call the
I thought I
COVID.
heard about that with Snowden. No.
Well, I mean, now it's with contact tracing using the specific app that they've built because
Sounds the
Google
same.
and Apple have built APIs, which is basically the foundation for apps. And now people are starting to use these apps, like in West Virginia, different states have started to build them on top of what Google and Apple built in. So it's using location data. And in these emails, which were found by the Electronic Privacy Information Center, it shows that it's really weird. There's a private task force, totally not government, that's called COVID-19 Tech Task Force, made up of Google, Mozilla, Microsoft, Facebook, Harvard Public Health, all these different tech companies who are working directly, these emails show, with the White House Office of Science and Technology developing the contact tracing apps. And you can tell in some of the emails, it seems like the Trump administration is trying to put some distance between themselves. Like at one point they say, please stop including us and looping us into your projects as it appears as that we're working with you when, we're only offering assistance. Like they were well aware that these emails could come out and but what the emails do show is for sure they are communicating
Quit
with,
treating us like friends.
yeah, they're like, hey, you guys are acting too friendly via email. But the emails do show that in March of
Thanks
this,
for the help, y'all.
just back in March, that the executive director of the National Fusion Center Association, which is just a lobby group for fusion centers, and for those who don't know, fusion center is another creation of 9/11. This is, like I mentioned earlier, one of the centers collecting data locally, federally, and they said that the National Fusion Center Association would like to, quote, create an automated contact tracing and notification system directly to the White House. for notifying them about contact who knows, all kinds of data related to contact tracing that they claim, there's going to be all these privacy protections when these things are being rolled out. So just another piece of the puzzle of everything we're dealing with COVID-19 and surveillance and the growth of this. And that
one person said they're not armed in Australia.
Yeah, they're not. They have been disarmed. And
remember that.
If anybody should be disarmed, I think it should be disarming
authoritarians.
Disarm the authoritarians, disarm the police. Speaking of that, I know we had this story.
Speaking of them, a riot?
Defund. Well, we got that one in 12 cities calling for defunding the police. Was that you, Johnny?
I think they go together.
Oh, yeah,
Riots
let's go
after
to the first
Portland
one.
Protesters set police union building on fire. This is a fresh one out. Police in Portland, Oregon declared another riot after local and state officials requested federal officers withdraw from the state. On Saturday, a mass gathering of protesters devolved into violence, with demonstrators later in the night blocking traffic with dumpsters, setting dumpsters on fire, vandalizing the Portland Police Association building. A group of people later broke a window into the PPA office and ignited a fire in the building. Officers of the Oregon State Police and PPP arrived in the area to disperse the crowd. They were met with a hostile crowd who began throwing glass bottles and paint balloons at them, the police said in a statement. The hostile crowd also tried to injure officers by shining green lasers into their eyes, which is a crime in Oregon. 3 officers suffered injuries. 2 were transported to an area hospital by police vehicle. So, yeah.
Things continuing, yeah.
And I know we're in the last few minutes. All these stories you can get into deeper on the websites because there's a lot of room.
I just want to add to that because what we talked with John Whitehead earlier, that's what I'm speaking on, what he's talking about. Like, that's the crazy situation. I definitely know there's people. He was even saying he talked to officers who were saying they're afraid of Antifa. But I do think still that the label domestic terrorist and domestic extremist, throwing that around the right to the left and the left to the right, sets a dangerous precedent, where we just start, oh, he's a domestic terrorist, and that could be very used dangerously. The government thinks they can kill and lock up people who are domestic terrorists.
At this point, we're all domestic terrorists.
I'd say so.
You got an idea? You're a domestic terrorist.
So this last one here.
Speaking of ideas, here's one that it seems like I don't understand why more people that support smaller government don't want to get behind at least the conversation. At least 12 cities are defunding their police departments. At least 12 cities have cut funding from police department budgets or decreased officer numbers, with several more in the process amid the national reckoning over systematic racism and police brutality, according to Forbes, at least. Seattle, it ended up city council on Tuesday passing the cut of $3.5 million to this year's budget. Not here in Houston, Seattle, $3.5 million, and 100 fewer police officers. And the police chief will resign shortly thereafter. Country's 2 largest cities, New York and Los Angeles, both approved budget cuts after protests began. New York slashed $1 billion from its 2021 budget, totaling $88.9 billion, reallocating $354 million to mental health, homelessness, and education, while LA approved a $150 million budget cut from its $1.86 billion proposed. Also in Cali, San Francisco approved a $120 million cut, $15 million police budget cut to Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Portland, Oregon, Philadelphia, Hartford, Connecticut, Norman, Oklahoma, Salt Lake City, also all approved the collective elimination of hundreds of police jobs and tens of millions of dollars from their department budgets. Several other cities, including Austin, Texas, are mulling the reallocation of funds within their own departments. And there's a lot of tangents and discussion in that dialogue.
I want to just add to that, Micah, because, I'm right there with you. Like, it's been surprising to see why some people who are typically for smaller government and against police violence and against the police state and, anti-government, not saying like, yeah, we should demilitarize the police, maybe take away some money, maybe, de-escalate all this sort of things. But I can also see some of the legitimate, complaints or concerns. Like when I talked to John Whitehead, what he was saying is, for one, in the CARES Act, which they passed months ago, that included billions of dollars more for federalizing the police and getting more military tools, included in this coronavirus package.
New FBI headquarters built with it.
Yeah,
new FBI headquarters and money for the Pentagon.
So
and the CARES Act.
What he was basically arguing is that, look, they might take away bits and pieces here and there from the local level, but that doesn't mean these federal military, because that's the thing is what they're sending into Portland. Yeah, it's not the military because it's not from the Department of Defense, but it's a paramilitary service
DHS,
group
right?
from the
Right.
Department of Homeland Security. It's still a federal agent that has been tactically trained to be a military officer and
That's
agent.
the military.
So, it's a military for all intents and purposes. So he was saying, like, look, they're taking bits and pieces away from some cops, but then they're giving all this money on the federal level and those are going to be the people who could step into that gap. So while I do believe that we should, take away money from the cops, that I am concerned that other things will step in. And I'm showing another story today. The Seattle police chief actually resigned today because of the budget cuts, saying that basically they're being like made useless. Like they're like, there's no way we can take on these protesters and protect the community with the tools you're giving us. So I'm not going to be in this role. And we've seen this in different places, cops resigning and stuff. And maybe some of it's just cops crying because they're not going to have all the toys they want. I'm not in favor of giving them all these weapons.
A lot of people would be happy.
But I think some people are like, if you imagine being like, if you were a cop and you're tasked with protecting the city from what you see as legitimate
you're barely
criminals,
making it work,
and
and
you're
now
like,
they tell you you're going to get this much less.
then maybe you would be like, hey, I'm not going to be here for this cluster or whatever. I'm not going to be here for this mess. Like, so it's just interesting to see all the different sides.
Maybe
to that
how come
conversation.
we're not talking about? So this is defunding the cops. Why don't we talk about defunding the laws? Like some of these extraneous. We brought up the Constitution earlier. Why don't we talk about some of these these extra constitutional laws that the government takes on, that the city alone takes on? Not to mention the state itself and everything else. I mean, there's one way to work on defunding the cops. Expect them to do less. Expect them to catch murderers, rapists, and thieves.
Yeah, maybe. I think also for me, I feel like the conversation, we didn't really get too much into it as far as the issue of the vaccines. There's always more that we can get into. We're about to wrap up. But when it comes to the vaccines, I feel like the reason they think that they have a right to your body for masks or vaccines or put an ankle monitor on you, it starts with they already think, and they have thought for 100 years, that they think they can tell you can't put a plant in your body.
Yeah.
They think, like that sets the precedent for going to the next level, They already think that they can control if there's ever been a sign that the state thinks they own us, this is it. Like they believe they own our bodies and our lives. Like
they thought it was legal before, and they made it the case that everybody had to turn in their gold. I mean, so come on, people.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're going to wrap up. This has been another episode of Freethinker Radio here on 90.1 KPFT Houston and on The Conscious Resistance. We're live, of course, on Facebook on several pages. We're live on Float. We're live on YouTube. You can find us at thehoustonfreethinkers.com. That last comment is great. Defund the government.
It said people were spending less on debt than before. I don't know with all these companies buying debt, but it said people were spending less on their credit cards, that they were actually saving. So maybe all this stuff is scaring people and they're saving. I'd rather they just save. That way they can be independent, but that's a good sign.
All right, guys, stay peaceful. Don't let them get you down. Till next time. Peace.
Keep thinking.
I should forget you so. I should forget you should just go, take that.